I'm Angela Kennecke, your host of Grieving Out Loud.
She had the biggest heart. She was the sweetest soul. She was so kind, but she was really struggling with depression.
27-year-old Mariah, a mother of three, died of fentanyl poisoning in 2020 after taking what she thought was Xanax. Now her mother, Rachel Carlisle, has become an outspoken advocate to break the stigma and tell Mariah's story on TikTok, where her videos have received more than 200,000 likes.
I have shared some very private moments like the funeral. I've shared the messages from her phone. I've shared my own thought during my own deep dives of my lowest of lows.
Rachel says she wants other parents to know it's okay to talk about the loss of a child to fentanyl and to know they are not alone, just like we do on this podcast. Well, Rachel, I first want to say that I am very sorry that we have to meet under these circumstances, both having lost a daughter to fentanyl poisoning. And I'm so sorry for the loss of your beautiful Mariah.
Thank you. And I'm very sorry for your loss as well of your Emily.
Rachel, can you tell me what happened with Mariah? She was 27 years old. Tell me a little bit about her and what happened.
Mariah was 27 years old. She was an amazing person. She was so artistic. She had the biggest heart. She was the sweetest soul. She was so kind. But she was really struggling with depression. She was very sad. And all of those things started when she was a young girl. And then in junior high, there were some things that happened to her. She lost her grandmother that she was extremely close to. She had a rocky relationship with her dad. And she always felt like she was living in the shadow of, others. And then she was raped, and I was not aware of it until she had already had her third child. So this was, in her mid 20s that she had told me about it. And a lot of it started making sense of a lot of her mood swings and things like that I just honestly thought were part of, growing up, but she was struggling. And then she had gotten into a relationship, and she was in that relationship for nearly 9 years, up until she had passed away. And her partner struggled with addiction, and Mariah thought that she could save him. And, she had seen me and her father struggle with our own addiction. And she saw that we were doing better. And, she just thought, you know what, if they could do it, I can do it. And she thought that she could save him. And sadly, she was putting herself to the side. And it just got to be where it was so overwhelming for her. And then came COVID, and she was the only one that was working to provide for her three children. And things started shutting down. It was being more, everyone was being more isolated. And that combination, she just started struggling. And she was already with her body. She had, different ailments, from having, three babies back to back, and, all of those aches and pains. And she suffered from back and hip problems. And so she was like, you know what? I'm going to take a pill. And she'd already had antidepressants throughout her junior high school, and adult life that she was on, but it just took over. It took over, one pain pill, and then let's take another pain pill. And after a while, and this all happened now within a matter of a couple of months. I mean, it went downhill very quickly. I could see the spiral, but then I was like, maybe not, because when I would see her, she was always on point, but she just started self-medicating herself. And she had come to the house on May 13th. She had dropped off her son. I decided, I was missing my grandkids, and I said, well, we'll do one at a time, and so he came to spend the night with me, and we had such an amazing visit that day. I mean, she put away her cell phone, and it was just about me and her, maybe because we hadn't seen each other, for quite a while because of COVID and everything. And we caught up, and she looked amazing. And she went on and out the door and said, I'll be here bright and early in the morning because, I had a doctor's appointment and she had to pick up her son. And sadly, I got that phone call and that she had passed away. And as I started digging, you know, I found out the awful truth of what was really happening. Um, it was a complete shock. It was a complete shock. Nothing that I would have ever expected. No one ever expects to lose their child. But had you asked me, if somebody would have told me, oh, well, you're going to lose your child, I would have thought, okay, well, obviously that's awful to even imagine, to think of. But I would have assumed, okay, maybe a car accident, right? Never in a
Mhm.
million years would I have thought that it would be what, the police like to say, overdose.
So she actually specifically got a pill that she thought was Xanax, right?
Correct. Correct.
Mhm.
Correct.
Do you know how she got that
Um,
pill? Did she get it online or how did she get it?
no, she had gotten it from her partner.
Oh.
So yeah.
So what is his accountability in all of this? Has he been charged with anything or what happened?
No, I had asked so many times from the very beginning. I need to know. I need to know what happened. I wanted all of it. And I even said, just shoot it to me straight. Because when I got that phone call, when the coroner came and they told me, well, because I asked, well, what happened? This doesn't make any sense. How is my child dead? And the coroner said, well, there were drugs involved and it was an overdose. And I, was like, there's no way. My children, everybody was like, no, 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 no. There's no way. And I hate to say this, but we all assumed that it would have been her partner, because he struggled and there was so many times that he had OD'd so many times. So never, this was a complete shock. And so I had asked him, I need to know the details. I just give it to me. What was happening? I thought maybe she had experimented with something and that, because I didn't know about fentanyl. I'll be honest with you. I had no idea about fentanyl. I never got any straight answers. And it took me to dig through her phone. I was able to get in her phone. There was a password. Her son knew it, my grandson. He shared it with us. And I was able to get in there and I was able to uncover all of the ugly. And then I waited for the results to come back and I started blowing up the police, asking them, I was calling nearly every day, every week, and saying, okay, none of this makes any sense. That's when I discovered that nobody had even been assigned to her case. Nobody
Oh,
cared. They just looked at it as just another statistic.
that's
And
horrible. That's horrible. And so nothing, there were no criminal charges, no prosecution to this date, nothing.
no, I am fighting. I am fighting very hard to be heard. And that is actually why I started doing these TikToks and being more vocal about it, because I did stumble across Drug Induced Homicide Foundation. And that is when I started realizing that I was not alone, that there are
Yeah.
thousands upon thousands. And my child, along with all these other thousands, were suffering and they, my daughter received something to numb it, to not feel anything. She didn't ask to die. That's a
No,
huge
no.
difference. There's a
Huge,
huge difference in that.
huge, huge. Yeah. And your daughter's partner who gave her the pill, is that also the father of her children?
Yes.
Yes. So, and so no charges against him or whoever supplied him with the pill. In my case, there were charges brought. The case was pretty, evident. And maybe it was because it was heroin and not a pill. Who knows why? Or maybe it's because my case was very public because I'm in the public eye. I don't know. But I can tell you it was the lower level dealer that was first prosecuted and then the higher level dealers. And eventually, even the guy, the boyfriend that she was with who bought it at the time was prosecuted for someone else's death. So all of these related people are all in prison now. It does not make me feel any better and it does not bring my daughter back, but it is, I guess, some assurance that it sent a message
Yes.
and that is about it. That's about it.
Yeah.
And I feel bad. Some of these, her new boyfriend that she was with, who purchased the fentanyl laced heroin with her, and the lower level dealer who sold it to them, actually it was and he was, this other guy was dealing a little bit too, but they really struggle with horrible addiction issues, right?
Mhm.
So I feel like prison is probably not the place for them. But then it's such a convoluted thing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how do you, so my question for you now is though, do you have any sort of forgiveness for him? Are you in communication with him because he's your grandchildren's father? I mean, how do you live with that? That's my question.
You know what? It's very, very difficult. I'll be honest with you. It's triggers. It's very triggering, extremely triggering. When I see him, I had asked him from the very beginning, like I had, already said, I needed to know the truth. That's all I wanted. That's all I wanted. And I kept getting the runaround, and there was absolutely no accountability, no sympathy, because there's so many other details that also, came about once I got the 911 call logs, the paramedic report, and I seen that nobody called until it was almost
Too
45
late.
minutes
Too late.
after. It was too late.
So
Um,
if they could have gotten Narcan to her, or if Narcan would have been in the house or something.
right, right. But it
Oh,
was told, don't call, don't call. I'm on my way. On my way meant hopping on a bike, and it took over 30 minutes to get to that location.
yeah. Do you think that they weren't aware of Good Samaritan laws?
I have no idea. I don't
Yeah.
know,
That's a huge problem, though, Good Samaritan laws.
it
So,
is.
just for our audience, if they're not familiar with how those work, if someone does overdose and other people are around you or using around you or have a record or anything, you call 911 because Good Samaritan laws means that you cannot be prosecuted in that case.
Right,
Um, and I
right.
think that just so many people are so afraid for themselves,
Yeah,
right?
right,
That
exactly.
so is that kind of what happened here in this case?
You know what? That's what I'm kind of thinking, that the person
Mm.
that she was with, she that person just, froze and got scared, and they
Oh,
called him, and but he, don't call. And so once I started like uncovering all of these things, I really was like, okay, wait a second. There has to be some form of accountability. It is really difficult because I do have 3 little grandchildren that are my life, and they're all that I have left of my daughter, beautiful pieces of her.
right.
And they actually were brought to me back in November, and the state of Indiana, Child Services placed them with me temporarily because their bio OD'd on fentanyl. He had took what he thought was a Percocet, and it was pure fentanyl, and it was in front of my granddaughter. And so luckily, he was had somebody there that loved him enough to call for help for him. And so they Narcaned him several times. The police were actually very embarrassed to tell me how many times they Narcaned him, but he was brought back. He got another chance. And so he followed all the steps that were supposed, that he was supposed to follow. And in June, my grandchildren were placed back with him. So once again, there was no accountability for anything. And that is the most frustrating part. And that is why I'm so vocal about it at this point now, because the accountability, there needs to be some accountability, and it's frustrating. And as you know, and thousands of other parents know, that it shouldn't take us, the parents, to have to find out what happened to our children. It just
Right.
shouldn't,
Right.
and during the most horrific time, that is just so unexplainable. There were times when I looked at him and I did feel bad, because what he has to live with for the rest of his life has got to be very, very heavy.
How are
But
your grandchildren doing? How are they doing? Your grandchildren?
um, they're doing good. They're doing good. I've been able to talk with them and see them, and there's it's a tough line. It's so hard because, how can I put it? I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. If I stay silent, then of course I get rewarded by being able to see them more. If I, don't stay silent, it could hurt me seeing them. It's a really hard journey. to
Yes, it
have to live
is.
this.
And those are some complicating circumstances.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
Um,
it's more frustrating because of the fact that I know the ugly truth. I have her phone. So I've been able to see the past 9 years of what was occurring. So
what
I
was
know how
happening?
somebody's
What do you know
mind,
now that you didn't know, at the time?
the verbal abuse, the mental abuse, there was becoming more and more physical abuse, and that all attributed a lot of it
Yes. Yes.
to
I think it attributes to their use. My daughter started at 16 with this guy that she was with until 3 or 4 weeks before her death. She had just started dating this new guy, and he was mentally abusive, physically abusive, and also an addict. And that has been really hard for me. So I completely understand. And I think it also, he met her at 16. He took her down this road, not that she didn't have a choice in it. Now, I'm not saying she
right.
doesn't have any accountability for
Mhm.
herself, but it's been very hard for me. And I don't have to see that guy. I mean, she didn't have any children. So I can't
Yeah.
imagine what that is like for you.
It's tough. It's tough. And I know a lot of people tell me, okay, well just for the kids' sake, and it's hard. I can smile right now, but I can tell you there's a lot of tears that are shed, a lot of tears. A lot of times that I've got to go in my room, I got to shut the door, I got to go in my car, and I got to scream. It's a lot, as you know, a lot of triggering moments.
Yeah. Do I was trying to think, do you feel like you'll get to a point? I mean, I don't know how you manage that. That's just hard. I don't know, because on top of grief, you also care about your grandchildren. You want to see your grandchildren. You have to see him. Did you learn that she had been using substances longer than you thought?
I knew that in high school she was dabbling in a lot of things. There was a lot of Molly, a lot of ecstasy, a lot of mushrooms back in her high school years that I had no idea about. Had
Sounds like
none.
I didn't know either. My daughter, same thing. Sounds like
Yeah, I
my
had
daughter.
no idea
Yeah.
about. And then obviously she got pregnant. She was 18 years old, and then she had, my grandchildren back to back to back. And then I always knew that Mariah honestly enjoyed having a Modelo, and she would smoke, she'd smoke weed, and that was it. And so many other people came and told me that, Mariah, she wasn't about that. People could be doing, drugs in front of her, and she'd be like, no, it was offered to her. And she would always say, no, I'm good. I'm good. I don't need that. I'm good. So yes, it was, to look through her phone and to see that it had started in January of 2020 that she started. It started with the clonopins, and then it started with the Adderalls, the Xanax. Then it started from there. It went very deep with Percocet, with oxys, with pretty much anything she can get her hands on. That is really hard to see. It's, as you know, it's so hard to see that because
Yes.
there was times when I would see her and I would think, okay, something's not right. Something's wrong. Because I had fought with,
Right.
addiction in my life. And, I thought I hid it
Yourself.
pretty well with myself.
Personally,
Yeah.
you had, yes. So you know better than anybody, right?
Right. Exactly. And I started seeing Mariah more withdrawing from, our group chats. Because me and my kids, we always do group chats together, just stuff. She was just, the phone calls were becoming less. She was my one kid who called me all day long, all day long. The text messages, all of it, and it started becoming less. I want to say in about March and April, it really became less and less. And then I would hear from her, Mom, I really miss you. Or when I did get the phone calls, there was a lot of crying going on, but now I understand why. Now I,
Yes. You don't know what you don't know. And when they're
right,
adult children, I had someone ask me once, like, how could you not know? How could you not know that she was doing? Because I just thought we knew my daughter was there was something
mhm,
wrong. And
yeah,
I thought it was weed and Xanax. And I
hmm,
had known that at one point she got a prescription for Klonopin, which is pretty heavy stuff.
yeah,
And I just thought it was those things, having no idea she was using heroin, no idea. And so for me, I didn't think she was going to overdose on something. And I'm a couple years ahead of you. And I had heard of fentanyl, but I just thought, well, she's taking these pills and smoking marijuana, she's not going to die. We're going to get her help. So I think when you learn these things after the fact, it takes time to process all that.
Yeah.
And one of your ways of processing that is by going on TikTok, and you're starting to gain quite a following. You have to follow Emily's Hope on TikTok. We're on TikTok too. We just got on.
I think I did. Oh, okay. I thought I did, but I'll have to relook again.
Great. But tell me why or how you came up with the idea to start going on TikTok.
Well, I had actually started, I thought, to do my own little videos of just memories about Mariah, and then I was like, well, maybe, and I made them, those were like my private ones that I would share on my Facebook, because on Facebook, I have become, I grieved out loud, from the very beginning of when
That's the name of our podcast, Grieving Out Loud. That's why I called it that, because
that's how I view it,
yeah.
But on Facebook, it's very different because you get to choose your audience, so my things are all private. I have really picked and chosen who's my friends, but then on TikTok, I was like, you know what? I wanted to really start making people aware of what was happening. And I wanted people to see that my daughter was just like anybody else's child. She was cross country, softball. I mean, she attended, all the pep rallies. She was just, just like anybody else's child, because I started realizing the stigma. The stigma is so huge.
Huge.
People are not coming to bring you casseroles when your child, has passed away from anything drug related. I found that out very quickly, and people don't want to talk about that. And I even had a woman one time, and God bless her, and I'll never ever knock her because of the fact that she was hurting is just like me. But she had mentioned when we had got to talking and both lost our child, and she said, well, my child didn't ask to die. My child was
didn't
in an accident.
ask to die. I wrote a blog
called an accident, and
yeah,
your child knew that that could happen. And I had to excuse myself very quickly because I was about to lose my Jesus.
Right. I'm so sorry that happened to you. And I think people just don't understand. I wrote a blog called My Child Died Too, but because I have all the time when I speak, someone will come up to me and say, my child died too, but it wasn't from drugs. And I just look at them like, what difference does it possibly make?
Right.
I mean, the pain is the same. We both lost a child.
Right.
Why would you say that? But it's almost like they don't want to be judged the way they must be judging me. I think that has to be it.
It's got to be.
Yeah.
I can't think of another way. Another reason,
So I get that. I get that. I'm sorry you experienced that.
Yeah. So
of course your child did not choose to die. Your child was poisoned. Your child was poisoned.
So that's pretty much why I thought, you know what, I'm going to start just sharing for myself. And then I'll post them on my Facebook. And it was a little scary because obviously, as you know, on TikTok, I mean, the whole world is seeing it once you make it on private. And people can be very cruel. And I'm thinking, if this woman who I know said that to me, can you imagine what strangers are going to say to me? But I thought, you know what, that's okay. You know what? I'm here. I'm still standing. I've experienced the greatest loss, the greatest pain. Honestly, bring it. And at this point, I'm like, I need to do something. I couldn't, and I needed to also keep my mind occupied. And that was my way to do it. And the more I started, the more I thought, you know what? I'm going to keep things going. And I have shared some very, very private moments like the funeral. I've shared, some of the messages from her phone. I've shared my own thoughts during my own, deep dives of my lowest of lows. I've shared those things, and I'm going to continue because this is the reality, and how I wish that somebody would have talked about it more, because maybe then I would have been able, where it would have came up, you know what I mean? Like for me, it wouldn't have been this huge shock, or I could have talked about it with my children, my grandchildren. And then also the stigma that comes about anything about being sad, depressed, all the ugly stuff that people, makes people very uncomfortable. And I get it. I totally get it. But it can't happen like that anymore. I know after Mariah's funeral, I was talking to a loved one and they said, okay, the funeral has passed. Your time of mourning is over. It is time to move on.
What?
And
They obviously have never lost someone extremely
they did.
important and close to
They
them.
actually did. They had lost children.
Really?
And it was just the old
Oh,
school Hispanic way of,
yes.
you know what, we do it, our quiet moments, it's private. We don't, and I thought, no, because maybe my daughter would have felt more comfortable coming to tell me what had happened to her.
Right.
All of those things. And here I thought I had a very open relationship with my children because I was raised in such a strict home and we didn't talk about those. We didn't talk about anything, And so I did it the opposite with my children. But sadly, it still, I guess, wasn't enough.
Right.
So that's why I
Right.
did it.
That's
That's why.
awesome. And I do think you're right. I had the very same thought that I've gone through the worst thing, the most hurtful thing, the worst kind of pain I think anyone can experience, the loss of a child. So whatever the world says or thinks, whatever other people, whatever they really can't hurt me. I mean, not to the extent that I've been hurt. So I agree
Absolutely.
that that was one thing that helped me go forward with what I'm doing. And I have had what I found interesting is when I put the story out there about what happened to my daughter, I really expected a lot more haters than I've received. And I would say about 98% of people were positive and helpful and cared. And it's that, 2% or so, the people who said things like, oh, she's just a junkie. She chose to die. She deserved to
Yeah.
die. You're a horrible mother. Those kinds of things. There was that. Unfortunately, our human brain focuses on the negative, right? So those things
Right.
stick with you more than the 98% of people who are, surrounding you with love. And I always try to remember that that's just a small minority of people out there.
Yeah.
Ignorant
Very
people.
true. Very, very
Ignorant
true.
means spiteful people.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. And that was something like yourself that I found I had so many more people that also shared my pain. I mean, it was, there's a few of my posts that I have, videos that I posted and person after person that knows somebody, whether it was a cousin, a
Mhm.
neighbor, a friend, a son, a grandchild, a niece, a nephew. I mean, it's astonishing. It's heartbreaking. And it really makes you stop and think, my God, this needs to be talked about,
Yes.
needs to be talked about.
Yes. I
So,
often liken it to the AIDS crisis. And if you listen to my podcast, you may have heard me say this before, but people were writing fake obituaries back, in the 90s and AIDS crisis, late 80s, early 90s. And they were ashamed, right, of how their loved one
mhm,
had died. There was so much stigma around being gay and just
yeah,
the whole thing. And it took a bunch of angry mothers, to say, I'm not going to write a fake obituary. I'm going to say what happened. And then I'm going to fight to change this. I'm going to fight for changes. And I think that's what we're doing. And we have to do it
yeah,
together because there's power in numbers. I think mothers can
absolutely.
change the world, but we have to do it
Absolutely.
together.
Look at MAD, Mothers
Right.
Against Drunk Driving. It was one mom. And now look at.
Right.
So that's why I have chosen to grieve out loud as what you call it, And I never even realized that, to be honest with you. I just, somebody had asked me one day, a family member, why do you put all your business out there? And I said, well, because I'm choosing to grieve out loud. I mean, I can't keep it bottled up inside, and even going, to therapy and stuff. I said, I have to let it out. I have to let it out.
Right.
So this is me.
The reason I'm grieving out loud is it helps me with my grief, but also just to help one other person, just to let one other mom know they're not alone, just to stop
Absolutely.
one other person from dying, for them to hear about fentanyl,
Yeah.
for them to know how prevalent it is in everything. And
Yeah.
that's why I do the podcast. That's why I call it Grieving Out Loud. I just want to be a resource for other parents to come together and to also provide information, so that we do understand. We understand addiction better. We understand mental health issues better. And we have tools to grieve as well.
Well, thank you for doing this. Thank you, because you've set the path, for moms like me to know it's okay, that it's okay to talk about it, to talk about our child, to talk about all the ugly, all of it, and to help in, stopping the stigma that is out here.
Well, thanks for saying that. I appreciate that so much. I know it's been a couple of years now for you, 2 years, right?
Yes,
Are there times still where that grief just knocks you down?
yes.
Hmm.
I think
And
more now.
really,
I think more now, to be honest with you. The first year, yes, very, very hard. And I remember the very first day, I was in shock. My children came, from the phone call. In the movies, that you see it, they scream and all of that. That didn't happen with me. It was just one of the. I was like, my body just like I was shocked, completely shocked. And then my children, came to my home, and I thought I got to keep it together for them and all of that. And but when everybody went home, and that I watched the clock, and it struck to the time that I knew my child had took her last breath, I just let out. It was sounds that I never knew I had inside of me, and fell to the
mhm.
ground because I knew that my child was now gone. She was gone. And then at the funeral, the same thing, I was trying to keep it together, for my children and all of that. And I was fortunate enough, I shouldn't say fortunate enough because it's not fortunate enough. I was able to spend the day before with Mariah, before her funeral, because my oldest daughter, it was one of the things between them. They said, well, if we ever, one of us passes away, we got to do each other's makeup, because they are perfectionists with makeup.
Mm.
And so my oldest did her makeup. And
Oh,
so I was there to support her. And then she said, please come in here with me. And I wasn't expecting to do that, but I went in with her, and I knew that I couldn't fall apart, because I knew if I did, it was going to have, my daughter would fall apart and not be able to do what she wanted. She knew her sister wanted done. So I kept it together.
wow.
And it ended up being a very beautiful experience. And I know that sounds, I know some people are going to be like, that is the weirdest thing ever. But the reason I say that is because anyone who knows us knows that, I was a teen mom. And so I grew up with my daughters. I had both of them by the time I was 17. So for us, when we got together, it was always, doing our hair, our makeup. That was something that we always did together.
Mhm.
And so it was like we did it one last time together. But this time it was like, Mariah didn't have any of the comebacks. So it was a beautiful moment, the last moment. But then I knew the next day it was still to keep it together, for my mom, for my sons, for everybody. But yesterday I went to the cemetery, and I hadn't been there in a couple of months. I'm so embarrassed to even say that, because I try to go there every single month, at least a couple times a month. And because I want it to look as she's thought of, loved. I'm the only one who goes, and but it's still important to me. I hadn't went because I guess I didn't really want to share with her that the littles, I call them my littles, my grandchildren, were no longer with me. And I feel as if I let her down, because I know what her wishes were. Because see, Mariah had a feeling that she was going to pass away. And she would always talk about it within the last year of her life. She had even written,
Really?
yeah, she had told me what her wishes were for her children. And she would tell people, she just had this feeling. So when I went yesterday, it hit me. I guess the numb fog shock is all like lifted, that heavy fog. And reality has now sunk in. The silence is cruel.
Deafening. The silence is
Yeah.
deafening.
Yeah.
Yes.
And,
Hmm.
it's no longer, where my mind is, kind of telling me, oh no, she's at work, or, now
Right.
finally my heart and my mind are on the same little, wave of saying she's gone. And it was hard leaving her yesterday. I didn't care who heard me. I don't even know if anyone was there. It just all came out, and I didn't want to leave. I felt like my feet were in concrete, and it did, it hit me. And I realized now, the first year, all of those first holidays, first all of that, now it's like, no. Mm-mm. I don't know if it's because her littles are, my littles are gone now. So it was almost like it all reopened it again.
I'm
I don't
sure.
know. I don't
I'm sure
know.
because that's another, although it may be hard to raise grandchildren, that is another loss for you. That's another loss to not have them there.
Yeah.
So, right. I could see
And
how
we
that
have,
would
and
just
when,
trigger.
the holidays come, it's not just one empty chair. We have four empty chairs. It's not just one anymore. It's four, because it was always her and her children. And we don't get that. We don't
Right.
get
So that's a huge loss upon loss.
that.
And it's tough to deal with. And I do think that, like you said, the first year is just shock. And to me,
Hmm.
the second year is depression. And to me, the third year leads into more acceptance.
Okay.
So I'm just, yeah, that's the way I feel about it, but I know everyone is different. And also, you go back and forth. So you may
Yeah.
be okay one day, and the next day you may not be. And that continues. And I think that's hard for the rest of society to
Mhm.
understand. You're,
Oh,
you're supposed to
yeah.
go to work, you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do that. But
Mhm.
sometimes it's really hard. And I
Yeah.
think society thinks, well, this happened to you 4 years ago. Why are you,
Yeah.
why aren't you okay?
It's a struggle. It's a struggle. And and then once the funeral and stuff have went by, everyone stops calling and checking in, and
Yeah.
and in that silence, like you said, I mean, it's really like, whoa. And I'm newly married. I had just got married a few months before my daughter passed away.
How has this grief, your overwhelming grief, because I know how you feel, and I can say that because I do. How has that affected your new marriage? Did it make it
You know
strain
what?
it or?
Honestly, he's God sent, because, as
Oh,
you know, you go through so many emotions. You
yes.
go through.
So you find yourself a good guy.
I did, I
That's
did.
awesome.
I really truly did. Even with my grandchildren coming in, I mean, I at one point I remember we were sitting there. It was, kind of rough, because my grandchildren came and they were very traumatized. I mean, they had been coming over and all of that, but once they came to live, that was different. They weren't going home. And I even looked at my husband and I said, I would not blame you. I would not blame you. If this is too much. I said, I honestly, and he looked at me and he said, this is part of our vows. I'm here. This is my
Oh,
family too. And I have so much love and so much more respect for him, especially after those 7 months that my littles were here, because he got a lot of, the anger stage, just he got a lot of it, where I didn't tell anybody else, but he was my reason to get up every day. He's never missed a lunch. I packed his lunch. He never missed it. He always had a breakfast. He's always had, clean clothes and all of those things. It was a struggle to push myself, let me tell you. But you know what? He's so good to me that it gave me something that I knew I had to do, if that makes
yes,
any
a
sense.
purpose. It gave you a purpose. You
It
you
gave me a
needed to.
purpose.
Yeah.
He didn't ask for any of this. And you know what? I could have crawled in my bed and stayed there for months at a time, and he would have said, okay. Because there were some times that I did crawl back in my bed and I
Sure.
would just cry. And you know what? He would come in and he'd put a box of tissue and he would shut the door and he would give me my space. And so I knew that, you know what, I've got to try for this man. I got to try. And so, yeah. So
Well,
it's
wherever we find our purpose, and you have grandchildren to have a purpose for too, but wherever we find our purpose, I think is very important to make it one foot in front of the other and to continue on. Yeah. Yeah. So will you keep making these TikTok videos? I mean, you've got a good thing going here, right? You're going to keep raising
I
awareness.
will. I will. I actually, I also have purchased billboards. Lamar Billboards has been so amazing. I had reached out to them and I had gotten some advice from a TikTok mom actually. And so I emailed them and let them know why, what had happened to Mariah, who I was, why it was so important for me to, why I wanted some billboards here in the region. We call it the region here in Northwest Indiana. And because nobody's really talked about it. And there has been I believe there has been the first prosecution for a drug-induced homicide here in
First?
Lake County, the first.
Oh,
But
we've
that is
had
it.
a lot of those here. We've had many federal ones, not
Yeah.
state, but many
Here,
federal
it's
ones.
been, just the first one happened in 2020, the fall of 2020. So I'm like, no, I'm not going to be silent. I'm trying to do anything and everything that I can to talk about it, to start really pushing, for this to be, hey, come on, this is not okay. We got to start holding some people accountable. We've got all of it, all of it. So I will continue with the TikTok. I will continue to be any type of media that I can. I am going to use it.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate that. And thank you for sharing Mariah's story and your story of surviving this horrible loss. And I'm going to keep watching. I'm going to keep following you on TikTok.
And I will do the same. I will do the same to support you in any way that I can.
You can follow Rachel Carlisle on TikTok, and you'll also find me there on Emily's Hope _. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Grieving Out Loud. If you like what you're hearing, please consider giving us a positive review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also check out all of our episodes and my blog on our newly designed website, emilyshope.charity. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage.